I'm Marshall Heim. I'm a graduate assistant here at Canisius in the Athletic Communications Department. And obviously, I was alerted by the cross country contact here about the story between you, Coach Huckle, and Katie about the hike in the Adirondacks, and then Coach Huckle alerted me to Davin's hike as well. So it's a really cool story about these two hikes. Just obviously. Just to give me some background, just what is really the big difference between a supported and unsupported hike?
Yeah, Davin, if you want to touch in on your supported first, and then Katie and I can go over the details of the unsupported.
So supported essentially means that you have crew or people who are going to support you intermittently along your way, which can be inclusive even of people who might on different sections pace you through those sections, that food and other aspects of what you will need will be available at different times, as opposed to having to carry that all with you, which Nate and Katie can go into that difference. But that's the primary difference. Is supported essentially means that you have people that are supporting you as you make your attempt. So at those points where they can access you or you can access them, you have the ability to interact with others and for others to join you at different parts of it.
Yeah, and then the unsupported, like Davin touched on, was we carry everything with us. We're carrying all the gear that we need to be out as long as we're out, and all the food that we need. The only thing we're not carrying along the way is water, and that we can pick up from natural sources, but we can't be provided with any water. So anything I missed there, Katie?
No, I think that covers it.
Yeah.
And then just, I know obviously the difficulty with the unsupported is, you are carrying all that weight. Just how difficult is it, especially at the beginning? I know you're carrying everything, and then you get to a point where, towards the end, you're not carrying as much, but I'm sure it's still, you're carrying a lot. Just how difficult is that, kind of going through your mind of, going through with carrying that much weight with you for a prolonged period of time?
I think
What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we spent a lot of time trying to dial in how much we needed to carry. And so the goal is always to carry as little as possible while still being safe and having enough to keep you warm, to keep, enough calories, enough food, so that you can make it through the whole trail. I think for me, it really just made a difference on how fast I think we could move. So when Davin did his, I think you ran the majority of it, or were able to run a lot of it. Whereas Coach Huckle and I were really hiked the entire thing because we were carrying maybe 15 to 20 pounds on our backs at all times.
Yeah, and I think that was a daunting part for me, and I think I benefited from Katie's planning and preparation for the trip, because I was kind of going off of her rough estimates. She had planned it first, and then I kind of jumped in later in the process. So I certainly benefited from that and got a framework for what I needed to carry. And there was definitely some anxiety surrounding that, whether we would have. And I think I don't know about you, Katie, but I might have had 400 calories left at the most in my pack when we finished. It was pretty bare bones at that point. I probably could have found some peanuts in the bottom of my backpack or something if I had to, but we were down to it. So
yeah, and I think I ran out, and actually you gave me some of your food, so we were right on the edge there at the end.
Yeah. Water was plentiful, but food was scarce after a while. And one of the things I read in Davin's report, and maybe you can expand on that as well, Davin, was the benefit of being able to switch out gear. Because I had some issues. I know Katie and I both had foot problems, and once we get a little bit further into this, Davin, I want to ask you about your feet and how your body held up. But I had inserts, and I tore the inserts, the orthotics off of the inserts, so I could keep going and not keep blistering my feet. And I think we both had pack issues with how our packs were setting. And I know, Davin, you had some pack issues at one point with one of yours. How was that for you? Was that what was your mindset around that, being able to switch in and out gear? Was that a little easier for you, or?
Yeah, the fact that it was my third attempt in one single summer, I think helped, because those first two revealed a lot about what did work and what didn't work. And so I was able, by the time that I did the trail from end to end, to be pretty dialed in with what was going to work for me. The other difference was the other two attempts I did shirtless, which does make a big difference when it comes to packs and chafing and things of that nature, versus the last time was in September, so it was colder. And so I actually had a shirt on. So I'm sure that that helped as well. But I think I can speak collectively for the three of us that no matter what weight or what you're carrying, when you first start off, your enthusiasm is high and everything seems easy. It's as you go on, even if you're minimally carrying, that things suddenly seem heavy and burdensome and challenging, and things just hurt. I can only imagine what it's like to try to carry everything, but I assume that at first it probably felt really light and wasn't that concerning. And the longer you go, the more things just rub and are not as good. So yeah, I don't know if that quite answered the question, but the fact that I had two prior attempts in the summer, I think really just helped me dial in what worked and what didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think our plan and the plan that Katie laid out would have been kinder to us, and we can go into that more later on. But I think we definitely got slowed down by the weight of our packs, and I was tentative to run a lot on the first couple of days, and so we end up being a little bit behind in our schedule. It definitely, carrying a 20-pound pack, and I know Katie's was about 17 with water. It definitely it played a large role in how long we were out there.
And then just kind of going off for Davin, just on your previous attempts, how far in did you get on those previous two before completing the third time?
So the first one I did, I went north to south. So I started in Lake Placid and got all the way to Wakely Dam. So I think that's about 65-ish miles. And the second time I attempted, I went south north. So I started at the southern terminus and ran to Wakely Dam. So I essentially did the whole trail from end to end, from two different ends in that. So I managed to preview the whole trail. But that second run would have been 74 miles, I think is what it totaled out to, something like that.
And then just obviously, I mean, this can go for anybody, just how when you are doing these runs, and I mean, I ran in high school for a year, so I kind of, which was only, a mile and a half or whatever, which to me now it's kind of like, because I've ran 5Ks and stuff, so it's like mile and a half. Okay. Just how these 140-mile trips, like when you complete these, how do you feel once you complete, when you reach Northville? I mean, I'm sure you have to be ecstatic finishing it and having an FKT. I'm sure that's got to be something that you guys are really really excited about once you reach that destination.
Were you ecstatic, Davin?
I think it gets to a point that the FKT is irrelevant. Yeah. There comes a point at which concluding is really the goal in and of itself. If you manage to get an FKT on the way, I think it's an added bonus, even if that's the ambition starting off. You reach a certain point in the trail where the determination is just, I'm going to finish this thing, and I'm not going to stop until I'm finished. As far as how it felt to be done, I think more than anything, I just wanted to sit down, because I essentially was in constant movement from the time I started till the time I finished. So to really just not be on my feet, to sit down, was monumental. Now I sat there, I had a beer, I kind of relaxed with the crew that I had for a little bit before I was put in a car, and I promptly fell asleep for 5 hours. So as far as elation goes, I don't know. I mean, I was running within 3 days, but my body is I'm used to the abuse that I throw at it. So I think that as you do these things, your body does adapt to doing them quite well. Not that I would suggest what I did to anybody, but I do think that there's an adaptation that occurs. And so the more that you do this stuff, the more that your body kind of just does adapt to it.
How about you, Katie? How did you feel afterwards?
I
was witness to it, but it's hard after a while to know what's going through somebody's head.
Yeah, I think it got really challenging for me. I think for both of us, but definitely for me. especially once we got past about maybe 50 hours, 55 hours, because it ended up taking us, between 62 and 63 hours. We had not slept much. We were on our feet for most of the time. And I think similar to what Davin was saying, at some point, like, I didn't really care how fast we did it, except for that meant we could stop. And that's really what I was looking forward to. But now looking back on it, I am glad that we did it, and that we did it in the time we did, and kind of that we worked through all of those challenges. And I did draw on my past experience as a high school runner and a college athlete, and then, like, as a runner, because I think in every race you reach a point where, the goal you had going into it, you're kind of debating whether it's worth it anymore, because, you probably felt that in your 1.5 mile race or in your 5K. At some point you're like, this is really, I don't know if this is what I signed up for, and I'm not sure how badly I really want to accomplish what I went in to do. And so I think in these long events, you just are in that place for much longer. And so the achievement, I think, so for me, like, it's even more meaningful, the achievement, because you've worked through it for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Nate can probably speak to this, having done 100-mile runs as well, but you have to kind of break it down by section, and you look at each section as its own achievement. And I think that my lowest point and y'all's lowest point was probably the same place, when that's the section of trail that follows Passaico.
That was tough.
It is a tough place. I was very low. It was for me through the night, which I only went through one night versus what you all did. But that's when it just felt long. And I did pretty good until then. But that was my low section. And I just tried to break it down. Like, I am just at this point going through this section from Passaico to Benson Road. That's all I'm focused on. I'm not focused on what's beyond Benson. I'm just focused to getting to Benson. The advantage I have is I knew I would see crew at Benson. So there for me was a little more of a compelling reality, in the sense of how at each of these conclusion of each of these sections, I would have crew access. And so I'd have a little support when I got to those.
Mm-hmm. And I think similarly, like, I was happy to be done. Looking back, I'm happy to have the accomplishment and to have the experience, out there and spend that time on the trail, and, with Katie, obviously, and push through that together. But spending time in those low points and spending so many hours exhausted, it really boils you down to a baser need. And just needing to sit down, needing to be done. It was definitely, it strips away a lot of the things that you set out with intentions for. It strips away a lot of that stuff, and it just leaves you with, I don't even really know what that base level is. It's kind of dark, and for most people, I try not to get into the description of that, because it's there's not a lot for them to anchor to when you're trying to describe it. But just being done was what we were focusing on for many hours.
Well, then you guys already touched on it a little bit, but just with the elevation change, I know I've seen on the website the elevation changes for both of the hikes here, and just how big of a difference is that from going, from, I saw a max of, I think it was about 3,000 feet to back down to like 1,000. Like, just, I know, and obviously with Coach Huckle and Katie, you guys were carrying. So that really has to play into a factor as well. But just how big does the elevation change play with your mind throughout the 140 miles that you guys were doing this hike for?
What do you think, Katie?
I mean, I think the interesting part about this trail is, yes, there's that elevation change, but compared to like the Adirondacks as a whole, like the hiking that you'll do, it's fairly tame because it's over that 140 miles, but it's fairly unrelenting. Like, you think, I think the trail, there's just a lot of like small ups and downs and a few big climbs. But what I found most challenging was there were a large number of trees that were down that we had to climb over and under and around, and that actually was more difficult for me than the elevation. I think. How about you, Coach Huckle?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we had the one, in Dobbin, you're probably very familiar with the high point of the trail where you come off of Tarbell
Section 2.
Road. Yeah, you come off that Tarbell Road off a Long Lake, and you've got a pretty good climb. And I remember we did that going into our first night, and we were hitting some like logging roads, and there's a decent climb. I'm like, oh, is that the top? And Katie's like, oh, I don't think so. And then we started to really climb and got into like almost like high peak-esque climbing for a little bit, where you're kind of rocky, and we were doing that at, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So it was challenging, but it wasn't, you could just kind of wrap yourself around the effort, right? And you're pushing through it. I would agree that the constant stopping and switching of pace and climbing over logs and going around deadfalls, like Davin, you said your low point was coming out of Paiseco. There's that section there where you just get back into the trail, and there was some crazy blowdowns, and we were like up on the side of this ravine and trying to find our way around and coming back down. And that was when my good headlamp burned out, so I had to go to my backup headlamp, which the illumination was nowhere near as good. Those things I think were a lot tougher than the overall elevation gain and loss during the trail.
Yeah, I would agree. It totally, as far as feeling it in your legs and stuff, it was that change of pace. So it was so hard in certain sections because of all the blowdown and things to ever feel like you could just, even if you were doing a fast hike, that you could just sit there and roll off the miles, because you just had these points where you were stopped dead in your tracks to climb over something or figure out if you could go around it. So it really wasn't the elevation. There's just that one sustained climb that really is noticeable. Not that there weren't little pips of up and down, but they were all manageable as far as the trail went. So not mountainous, not climbing through the high peaks. It really just kind of traces through the valleys. So you just undulates its whole way.
Yeah.
And then just kind of going to why you guys did this. Is there a certain reason why this trail, or how did this trail become the point of we want to do this trail? Like, were you alerted to it, or did you find it? Like, how did that come about?
Who wants to go first?
I'll let Katie answer for us, because like I said, I just kind of tagged onto her trip. Katie and I have done, numerous ultras together and a lot of hikes and stuff in the high peaks. So, I think she had been planning this for a while, and I just kind of went along for the ride and, for some fun, I guess.
So I had known about the trail. I hiked it a couple of years ago as a through hike. So I, took 11 days and just did, a nice leisurely hike, and then, camped out and had a really great experience. And then this past year, a lot of races that I normally would kind of train for and work towards were canceled because of the pandemic. And so these FKTs became pretty popular in the running community. And in our area, this was one of the biggest ones that you could go for. And I had done the trail and I loved it. And so I wanted to get back out and just see how quickly I could do it. And then luckily, or fortunately for me, was able to convince Coach Huckle to come along with me so I wouldn't have to be out there for 60 plus hours on my own.
So it's just one of those beautifully awful ideas in some ways. I spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks in high school, mainly cross-country skiing. So I was familiar with the area and familiar with the Jackrabbit Trail and some of the other long trails in the area. So I knew of it, but it'd been kind of Rolodexed in my head for a long time. Like Katie, I do a couple 100-milers every year, and all those races got canceled. So everything that I had planned got canceled. But as we got shut down, I actually ended up with great training. So I was physically in a great place. And it was one of those, what do I do with this fitness that I have? I don't have a place to kind of go express that as I usually would. And I was recording a podcast with some other people. And the suggestion was, well, why don't you go take on the Northville-Placid Trail? Why don't you go do the NPT? And 2 weeks later, I made my first attempt. So I took that beautifully awful idea and I just went and said, like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll just do that. So then as you start to research into it, as that idea is planted, you realize that the trail predates any of the other long trails in the United States. And it was the first trail that was mapped out by the Adirondack Mountain Club. And, some great history. There's the French Louis section, is a section where you run past these ruins that go way, 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 way back. The last camp of the last Adirondack, what do they call him? It's up there on that first section.
The hermits there, the
Hermits.
Rondo.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. The last Adirondack hermits
Hermitage.
who died in the 50s or the 60s. There's just some really cool stuff. And you really can't be in certain places, more remote part of the Adirondack Park than on that trail. So you're really out there. There was a time in 2 of my runs where you didn't hear anything that was not natural for hours and hours and hours. Not an airplane, not a motor, nothing, because you are so far from anything that is civilized that it's just you and nature. That's it. So any of the noises being made are either you or what's out there in the natural landscape.
Yeah.
I would add too, I think for all of us, like when you look at the times for the previous fastest known times, they don't look that fast compared to what you would expect it would take to run that trail or to hike that trail. But I think it's deceptively hard, as we all, found out. But I think that's one of the things too, looking at the times, it looked doable.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Katie. And there has been so many attempts since those times were set. So for supported time, it was set in 2011, and there have been so many attempts to try to better that. And most people end up pulling up around Wakely Dam. That seems to be a common place where people pull out. But you look at the time and you do think, well, that's manageable. That doesn't seem that hard. So Sheila Wheeler's time, who was the person that did it in 2011, which was before the trail expanded, so it was 122 miles at that point. She did it in 35 hours, I think it was. And so for me, I've run 100 miles in under 16 hours. So I thought 122 miles, 35 hours, I can totally do that. But that's just not recognizing some of the challenges that the trail offers. It's tough. It's just tough.
The only thing I would add to the why behind getting out there was, Davin said it and Katie said it as well. Like this year, everything was canceled. And so we couldn't get out and do our normal long efforts. I think there's something in the DNA of an ultra runner, or, even beyond ultra runners, there are people out there that just need to get out and scratch an itch a couple times a year to just do something really hard. And I think that's, I joke about jumping on and joining Katie, for fun, but like I need to get out there a couple times a year and just do something that's really challenging, to kind of push myself and see where the limits are. And, there's some stuff I want to talk about a little bit later that Davin posted in his post-run or trail effort about kind of getting to the edge of yourself and looking over that edge and seeing what's there and whether or not you'd recommend it to other people. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to anybody else. I'd recommend it like Katie did it the first time, as a 10 or 11 day hike and go through and really enjoy it. But I think all of us probably would agree that we just need to get out there from time to time and get in touch with nature and strip yourself down to a baser level and let go of all the distractions that are here in our work life and, personal lives, and just recalibrate, reset ourselves a little bit, whether it's physically, spiritually, whatever it might be. There's just a need for it with our personalities. And I think it serves a great purpose for us. Maybe we went a little too far this time, but it's a good thing for us on a normal basis.
And then kind of going off what you guys have been saying with, with the hike and everything, is there, I know with, talking about the difficulty, like it's a very difficult trail from what I've been gathering from the three of you. Is there a certain time of year that is good to do this? Is it, it seems like summer it'd be too hot. So I'm is it right to say that early spring or fall when both of you did it in September, October, is that like the right time to do this trail, or is there another time that would be a good time to do this?
I certainly wouldn't attempt it in the spring. I can only imagine how muddy it would be in the spring. So that would never be a time to do it. And following that, you get into black fly season. So it would be miserable for a different reason. I was just on the edge of the end of black fly season with my first attempt, but I was running. And so the effect of the black flies was mitigated a lot by my speed. By the time that I did the full trail in September, black flies were done. So if you look at past attempts, most of them seem to be in mid-August, in the month of August or September. And I think that largely is the trail conditions are optimal, the bugs are minimal, and temperatures are reasonable.
I would echo that. I think we actually did it a little later than I would advise, just because we were running into shorter day length. And so we ended up spending a lot of time in the dark, and that just slows you down and also is mentally tough. And we also had to carry a lot more because it was getting cold at night. I think on our second night, we were crossing a bridge and it had frosted over, and actually Coach Huckle almost slid off this, like, in my mind, it was like 20 feet high, but it probably wasn't, like, off of a bridge into the river because it was so cold. And so I would say August is probably a good time because you're balancing the daylight and you're past the bugs and it's dry enough.
Yeah, in the springtime, some of those river crossings, especially one after, that last river crossing that you have, it just wouldn't be feasible. You couldn't do it, so it'd be too much water. And yeah, you don't want to be there during the height of black fly season. Black flies aren't too bad because if you're moving fast enough, especially if you're running it, even hiking, they're not too bad. But the deer flies, Katie's done the Wakely Dam Ultra a couple of or at least once, right? Did you do it twice? And it's like that area is terrible for deer flies.
All right. I don't think I have anything else. If anybody else has any other questions for anybody else, feel free to go ahead and ask those. But I'm all out of questions right now, unless we come up with anything else.
Yeah, I've got a couple other areas that I'd just like to delve into a little bit, just for my own curiosity. And Davin and I had reached out to him immediately afterwards and asked him if he'd be willing to talk about his experience, because I was having trouble with, I think Katie and I both struggled with it a little bit. I think, like, we've both done hundreds. Davin's done numerous hundreds. I don't know, Davin, how do you compare this to a 100-miler? Did you have to go to a darker place for yourself? Was this harder in ways than a 100-miler? Like, what was your experience with the effort level?
It was similar. It was just much longer in those dark places. I've found with hundreds that once you are hurting, you're not going to hurt necessarily more. And it was the same with this. Like, once the hurt was there, once the miles were in the legs and I was hurting, that hurt was not going to get any worse. It wasn't going to get better either. So it really just becomes a determination. It's the length of time. I think that was the hardest thing to really kind of wrap my head around. With a 100-miler, I really have a sense of how long I'm going to be out there, and what to expect. And this was so much longer. So enduring through something that was so much longer, and being mentally more tired than I've had to be. I mean, every 100-miler I've done, I think the longest I ever took was 21 hours. So going past that 24-hour period of being awake and navigating through the night, fuzzy mentality and stuff like that was hard, was different.
Yeah, I would say definitely, it was more challenging for me than the 100-miler I did. I think what I underestimated was how mentally challenging that extra 42 miles was going to be, right? Because when you're accustomed to wrapping your mind around 100 miles, you start to play games with yourself. You compartmentalize. You get through the first 25. Like, we made it to the Hermitage by lunchtime, and that was what, 20 miles down, Katie?
Mhm.
We
Yeah,
felt
about
great.
20 miles.
So at that point, you're almost a quarter of the way if you're doing 100 miles. And, the first day, I think we knocked off like 48 or 49 miles, and we would have been halfway there. But, when you're doing 142, you're basically a third of the way there. And so that extra bit was, that weighed really heavily on me the second day. I think my darkest point, other than finishing and coming down that unending switchbacks, coming out of those woods there, well, that was rough physically and mentally. I was shot at that point. But I was confiding in Katie the second day. Like, I had some real low points in that second day because I had wrenched my wrist, and I was thinking of home, and I knew I could see it slipping away with that extra 42 miles, that we were not going to get home on Sunday until late, and I wasn't going to be able to put my daughters to bed, and I wasn't going to be there for my family. And that was my dark point. I wasn't anticipating it because I'm a new dad, and I've only been married for 3 years now. And so having those responsibilities, I don't think I'm mentally, like, I haven't learned to cope with that yet. So that was really challenging for me. I think I rallied a bit once we got to that last 40 miles. Once we went into the woods past Paiseco, I think I got my second wind. And I know at that point, Katie had, a harder time. So it was definitely a challenge, though. It was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. And I don't know, like, Katie and we tried to unpack it a little bit. We talked a little, like a week later, but I still don't think we really were able to touch on like what we really experienced. What were your thoughts, Katie?
For me, I've only done 100-mile race, and I definitely found this to be more difficult. But in hearing Davin talk about it, I do identify with that. Like, once it got hard, it didn't get harder. It was hard for a really long time, and that is a new experience for me, and one that I wasn't sure that I could. Like, at some points I wasn't sure that I would be able to finish, or that I would find it worth it to finish. And so just working through that, I think that was the biggest sense of accomplishment, is like coming out the end of that, knowing that like I could just keep going, and when you think you can't. And so yeah, I found it very difficult, though.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I think going into that same section, Nate, was where I knew that I would finish. Once I got on that section of trail, I was like, well, I'm going to finish now. And it was just a question of how long it was going to take. So that was the real hurdle for me, was running on the road through town. But I knew that if I went into that trail, that I was going to finish. And that's where the mentality, I think, of having the experience of running 100-milers, I've broken those down in the same way. So Nate's done the Oil Creek 100. For me, and I've done that, I don't remember, 3-4 times. Thankfully, I've forgotten, or it's a blur. But it's entering that third loop. I know that if I start that third full loop at Oil Creek, I'm going to finish. There's no question about it then. And that was the same for me as entering the trail there. I was like, I'm going to finish. This is going to hurt. It's going to be hard, but I'm going to finish this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested too, where you're talking in your, or you wrote in your post run experience there on Facebook that, about the role that others play in your efforts. And, Davin, I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, just, what it's like to have a support crew out there, and what you learn about the people that you surround yourself with, and your, what you learn about your relationship with them, and kind of about yourself when you're doing something like that, where you have a support crew.
So the prior 2 attempts that I made, I pretty much did them solo. I did them on my own, except for being joined by one person for 13 miles in attempt number 1. So otherwise they were alone, which, though 100-mile races are events run with other people there, I generally don't go in a crewed format. I tend to run them alone. So it's not unusual for me to kind of approach things that way. Now, I did have a crew person in the sense of somebody who was meeting me at road crossings and providing that kind of support. when I did it the final time, I had like a full crew. There were 3 cars. I think I only ran one section of trail alone, and otherwise I had somebody with me on those trail sections. I dropped people on several sections, which they were okay with. So if I was feeling good and it was flowing, at a certain point, I would say like, hey, I'm going to take off. Is that okay? I think what you're asking, there's a couple of pieces to this. One is when you have that many people present, that becomes its own impetus to finish. Is a lot of people have sacrificed their time and their weekend to be there for something that you're doing. And that can feel very selfish, but your accomplishment is also their accomplishment. So I have to say that last time, perhaps part of the compelling force was that I had all of these people who had contributed their time. Now, would they have thought any worse of me if I decided to say like, no, I can't do it, I can't go on? No, but I have to say that was compelling to have all of those people there to do that. The second part was all of them were incredible in the sense of the kind of people who were very positive in their outlooks and their contributions. So there was nobody who was someone who said, I can't do this, or who weren't offering a joke in the middle of the night when I didn't feel like joking around, or who couldn't read my mood enough to know that when I wanted to be silent, just not talk and just be at my dark place. So I had an incredible crew, and I do think that my ability to do it really is upon their shoulders, greatly so, which was different for me. Like I said, 100-mile runs, I do them on my own, usually with just one person there with me, but no pacers or anything. So having all of these people pace me and be there was a very different experience for me. It's like having a team, and I ran cross country way back in high school, and I know that chemistry of a team. It's not something I've experienced in other parts of my life or even in the running that I've done. And so this really was feeling like part of a team. This whole team contributed to make this thing happen.
Yeah. How did you feel, Katie? Because I know I've crewed for you in your 100-miler, and Dave, your husband, is obviously usually out there crewing as well. And we were able to see Dave and his brother John, a couple of points in the run. They would wait for us at a road crossing and say, hello as we came through, and how you doing? And then we'd just go right by because we couldn't accept any aid or anything. What was this experience like for you? I mean, obviously you had my company out there the whole time, for better or worse, but what were your thoughts on it?
I think you and I have done a number of tough endeavors before. Like you said, we've done a lot of hiking together. You paced me for a 100-mile, I paced you for your 100-mile. But I think going through this experience together was certainly, I feel like you get to know people better when you're out there in that kind of place for a long time. So I do feel like, I think it would have been a lot tougher to do alone. So certainly think that having 2 of us helped a lot in that. I wouldn't have finished had you not been there. And then I think having support, even though we weren't supported, just knowing that our families were supporting us definitely gave me a boost. So like you said, my husband Dave, drove us up there and was hanging out all weekend, and is so supportive. So that is definitely something I think about when I'm doing these endeavors.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I try to really focus on with my team here at Canisius is like putting an emphasis on relationships rather than the accomplishments that you're striving for. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about going into some of the ultras. I love the ultra community. They're, super engaging and empathetic and helpful. And, even the people at the aid stations are fantastic. I wish there were a few aid stations on this effort. That would have been great to, run into one of those somewhere along Paseco, at night. But, that's one of the things that I really focus on with the team is, develop the relationships. And I think, that's something that I take away from this. Like, I obviously know Katie a lot better after doing some of these efforts. And, I get to know her husband, Dave, and his brother, John. The fact that Dave was waiting for us at 2 a.m. when we popped out onto the paved road at Passaico, just waiting there in the car. I think they were watching a movie or something, and then they had to drive like an hour and a half back to their hotel to sleep for a couple hours. They couldn't even do anything. They couldn't provide us with anything. It was just being there, at that point in time. And that was a low point for us, because once we woke up and started going at 5:30 in the morning on our second day, we went all the way through. We went for 39 hours without really stopping. We had just stopped prior for about 50 minutes. We laid down and went to sleep, and tried to recoup a little bit because we were so fatigued. We were falling asleep hiking. But yeah, I think you definitely get to know the people that you surround yourself with when you do something like this. So that was a good experience overall. Are the two, that kind of brings me to my question that I've been asking myself for a long time. Are the two of you happy that you did it? Is it something that you would consider doing again, or would never do that? Davin, in your Facebook post, you said something about not being eager to go and look over that edge again anytime soon. How do you unpack that? Where are you both with? Would you do it again, or are you glad that you put this effort in?
Yes. I think when you have some time away from something, it's easier than to look at similar challenges and to say, hey, I did that challenge. I'm curious about this other one. So will I don't know, maybe, but what it would look like and where it would be, I don't know. I think it would have to be a pretty organic thing, in the sense of, it's not an ambition that I'm driving for. It's nothing that I'm looking for, but if something came about, it's something that I wouldn't be against the idea of.
I would do it again. I feel like I could do it. I think I could do it quite a bit faster. I would maybe not do it in the same way. I would change some things, but I feel like I might have unfinished business with the Northville-Placid Trail.
Yeah. I think the other perspective that I would offer, and Nate, I think you were hinting at this, is I was saying to various people who shared the trail with me, I would love to do it as a fast pack, or so kind of a hybrid of a run / camp thing. Because I think that you could very realistically do it in 4 days and do it quickly, but to enjoy some of the scenery a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're just going, you're kind of missing some pretty incredible stuff. You're catching it at a glance as you go to the next thing. So slowing down a little bit, but still having it be something that's hard, where you're really doing a lot in a day, is appealing as a very different way to approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And that's how I would recommend it. Like, I don't think I would recommend it to too many people. Katie and I talked about it, and I don't know too many other people that I would want to be out there with and pushing through that with, or that I would recommend going after that record. I mean, there will be people that will go after it, and it'll probably fall at some point. But I think it's probably much more enjoyable experience to take, like you said, even 4 or 5 days where you're knocking off 20 to 30 miles a day would be a great experience, because you're not hiking all night long, you're sleeping. There were a lot of cool places, because Katie had done it before. So we'd come through an area and she's like, oh yeah, we stayed the night here, and the lean-to is fantastic. And, all the lean-tos along Long Lake and in the West Canada chain of lakes there were great. I would love to go back at some point and spend 10 days in there. And, maybe once my daughters are old enough, if I don't make them hate the woods, if I manage it correctly and don't do anything too stupid hard with them, maybe they'll go through hike it with me at some point. But I think I would do it again as well. As Katie said, I think we could improve upon. I think we could do it better, but that's the part of my brain that is never quite satisfied as a distance runner with what I've done, and being able to approach it differently. And I think it was led to this because of the pandemic, and I didn't have a cross country season, so I could get out that weekend and spend that effort out there. But also not having a cross country season and not being here at Canisius, I wasn't able to get in a weight room for 6 months. So if I was able to do some weight training and do different things and approach it a little bit differently, I think it could go a lot smoother. But I don't know. There are also other big efforts out there, other things that you could spend your energies and emotions on rather than this trail. But yeah, it's enticing. So trying to see if there was anything else that I wanted to touch on. I think, Davin, you brought that up with the idea of going out for 4 or 5 days. It's just a shame to miss some of those things and to miss, spending time in those beautiful areas. I mean, when Katie posted this on Facebook on the Northville-Placid Trail page, there was somebody that asked, like, why are you doing this? Why would you do it like this? Why wouldn't you take your time? And I think there are merits to both ways of hiking. I think getting out and taking your time and only covering a little bit of ground, but doing it thoroughly is great. And I kind of struggled with that. Like, okay, is it more valuable to do that, or is it, valuable to do what we did? We got to see the whole trail in one weekend, which is awesome, fantastic. Like, I've done the whole thing now. So I don't think you really can compare those two experiences. I think they're two different experiences, and to place a value on them or to say one is more significant than the other, I think is doing an injustice to either one.
Like you, Nate, I have a family, I have a daughter. And so how I got into ultra running to a degree is what I could compress into the time that I really have to manage. And this was a way that I could approach this trail and do it at this point in my life. It had to be compressed.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is very interesting to see a lot of those responses at attempts like this, and success is there are people out there that just cannot wrap their mind around why anybody would want to approach these places in this way. But I think both avenues have their merits, and probably somewhere in the middle is where there is a happy medium of both. And that may be where someday I slow down enough to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah. I think the last question that I would have for both of you is, Davin, you touched on it in your post-run summary. Like, when talking to other people about this, and when Marshall reached out to me to do this interview, I was trying to figure out how do we make this engaging? How do we make this relevant? Like, there will be people that will read this, and some people are very interested in ultras, or very interested. Like, I would watch this interview because I'm interested in FKTs and ultras and, that sort of thing. And so I'm trying to learn things from it. But when people are asking me, why do you do this? Like, it's hard for me to describe it to them in a way that's engaging to them. Like, I don't want to get too philosophical. I don't want to get too much into the pushing yourself to your limits, because some of that is not relatable. Where do you go with conversations like that when somebody asks you about it, or, when we're doing something like this, how do you feel it's engaging? How do you feel it's relevant?
Katie, you want to?
Yeah. So I've been a lifelong athlete, right? Running was my sport of choice that I started, as a modified athlete. And I think the ability to continue sport throughout your life is something that I identify a lot with, and I appreciate with, and I think there are a lot of people out there that continue sport in some way, right? Like, whether it's running 5Ks or mountain biking, or playing like frisbee golf with their friends, or whatever. Like, I think there's a genuine desire to either watch sports or continue participating in sports. And I think this is just a very unique venue for continuing sport for all the reasons that, we find it so engaging as a species.
I suppose I come at it from a slightly more philosophical point of view, which is we all have our own mountaintop that we need to climb to for whatever reason. So, the quote that's attributed relative to Everest with the question of why climb it is because it's there. And I think it's just a matter of defining what your mountaintop is. And so for some of us, it's 142-mile trail run is our mountaintop. We need to do it because it's there. For other people, it might be reading, the 50 great books of the world, or it may be traveling, or I think you define what your mountaintop is. And so for those people who don't understand running or sport in this kind of extreme expression, I think you can find an avenue by understanding what their interest is, and then connecting it with this sort of mountaintop of, okay, take your interest, whatever it is, and understand that you going and taking that to its end to gain a perspective, whatever its mountaintop may be, is the same thing.
Yeah, because I know that's something that I struggle with, because I find it relevant in my life. I find that these things make me a better person. I come back from an effort like this, and I am more thoughtful. I am more patient with the world around me. I am a better version of myself. Just like exercising every day makes me a better version of myself for the people around me. And I think that these efforts where I get out and get humbled, and that's sometimes what I'm looking for, is just to strip away the hubris, of life and how comfortable we get and what we think we can do. And once I do that, I come back and I'm a better person moving forward. So, I appreciate both of your insights to just try to understand it better and understand. I'm always looking to understand myself and the people around me better. So, but thank you both very much. Anything else that either of you wanted to touch on or ask questions of?
So I'm curious what the one piece of equipment for both of you would be that you would look at and say it was absolutely fundamental. And that can't be like shoes and things like that, because obviously those are fundamental, but something that you carry that you're like, absolutely, that's what I do again. And the one thing perhaps that you would say was totally frivolous or unnecessary.
That's a great question. I mean, fundamental, like one of the things that I think we made a good decision to carry 2 water filters. Obviously you need a water filter when you're filtering water, although Katie did drink from the last river crossing without, and I think she's still healthy. So everything is going well.
I'm good.
I don't know if that'll be my answer, but definitely water filters. And Katie dropped her bottle at one point and part broke. So we were almost out of luck there, but I did have my backup filter and I was using mine for most of it. So filters are essential, obviously. Was there anything essential that you thought you had, Katie, that you were like, yeah, that I nailed that one?
I mean, this is the only thing I can think of right now, and it's not important, but it's Sour Patch gummy bears. Like, those tasted the best of anything I ate that entire trip, and I did not carry enough of them. So
they did taste good.
Next time I will bring many more.
Yeah. I think the one thing too that really made a difference was a really good headlamp. Like, I've got a good headlamp and a headlamp that I used to think was good, but it's not compared to my good one. And when I was using the good one, I could navigate better at night and be more confident in what I was doing. And when I was down to that little headlamp, in Katie's headlamp the first night, the batteries were low and she didn't realize it. And it was throwing off like a lightning bug illumination.
It was so bad.
It was not
so
good.
Bad.
So yeah, headlamp, a really good headlamp for an effort like this, where you're especially going into that second night. The first night we were champs and we pushed through until like 12:30, went to sleep for 4 hours, got up, and it was no problem. That second night, knowing we were going all night long, and you've done that, Dobbin, with 100 milers, where you're going into the dark and you're going to be running in the dark for a long time and maybe until the sunrise. Man, a killer headlamp makes a big difference. Anything that you had in the pack, Katie, that you would ditch for the next time?
Well, I bought this like very inexpensive rain suit because there was a chance of rain. The pants ended up like splitting down the middle. So I basically had like chaps and then like duct taped them together. So like I either invest in higher quality rain gear or just don't worry about it and be like, I'll be fine without them. So probably that. But I think I think the biggest thing I would change is the time of year. I would go when it's warmer, because we had to carry like, warm sleeping bags, all of our sleeping gear. And I think without that, it would significantly lighten our load.
Yeah, if we could get the packs down to 10 pounds or less, you could go a lot faster. I'd be more comfortable doing more running. Yeah, it would be a lot better. But I would say if we went a little bit earlier, I would ditch my sleeping bag. That would be one thing that I would not take. I slept the second night when we stopped for an hour. I had a space blanket that I pulled around me, and I stayed warm enough for that period of time. I don't know if it would last for like a 4 or 5 hours sleep, especially not that, in those nights when it was getting down into the low 30s, and maybe a little colder that second night that we were out. But I'd probably ditch the sleeping bag and maybe my pack cover that I had, because we were doing raincoats on, raincoats off. I was taking my pack cover on and off when we were getting little showers. I think I would just go with the raincoat and pull it over my pack as well, just to save time and a little bit of weight. How about you, Dobbin? Anything that you would do differently as far as gear was concerned?
Being crewed really does change the equation, because I had the ability at various intervals to choose what I would wear or not wear. I went into section 1 with kind of in my first attempt where I went north to south, my memory of that section had a lot more blowdown than really was there. And I don't know why that was the case in my memory. It hadn't been cleared or anything. So I went into section 1 with trekking poles, and I never ended up using them during that. However, I did use trekking poles extensively on the last 2 trail sections. So they became instrumental later on, but I didn't need them early on when I was fresh. They were just getting in the way, particularly how much I was running. So that just came with, they were very fundamental at the end, but in the beginning were absolutely unnecessary. It was so different. In July, I had temperatures in the low 80s my first attempt. So I chewed through hydration like crazy. So when I came out in Long Lake, I didn't have a drop of liquid left on me. And I didn't have filtration with me because I was doing it supported and had gone in with, let's see, about 2 liters, 2.5 liters of fluid on me, and figured this is fine. So it being cooler was an advantage in the respect that I didn't end up, my sweat rate was just so much lower that I could manage that a lot better than I had the first time around. But new for me, I've run every 100-miler with handhelds. So I've never used a hydration pack before. So this was a completely new experience in the sense of needing to carry that much fluid because of lack of access, and having my hands free. That was also different. In regards to the headlamp, I used 2. I used a waist lamp and a headlamp as I particularly went into that section after Piseco. So that was my real overnight section. And I was glad to have those 2 to just kind of illuminate everything even more. Because it's just really dark in there. Yeah. And that made it a huge difference. So I absolutely agree that a really good headlamp or really good illumination makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, we had it timed out that it was full moon. We thought that was going to give us a little bit of a bump with illumination. Not so much. It was still really dark in those woods. So the only other thing I wanted to mention was Katie and I, by just dumb luck, timed it perfectly that there was no beaver dam coming out of Wakely. There was nothing. It was just a little bit of mud on the ground, and we didn't even get our feet wet. So, but I've heard since then that the beavers have rebuilt their dam, and there is a pond back in there again. So we hit like a week-long window of no pond, which was perfect.
Yeah, you lucked out on that one.
We really lucked out. So, anything else from either of you, or any words of wisdom to anyone foolish enough to go and attempt that hike in the next year?
I think with any attempt like this, you just got to do your research.
Yeah.
You're never going to know fully what you're getting into until you're into it, but you need to have a sense as to, the roads you're going to cross, what you're going to encounter, if you're going to do it unsupported, how you're going to filter water or get access to water. If you're going to do it self-supported, where you're putting your drops, if you're going to attempt it that way. And if you're doing it supported, you've got to have maps for all of your crew. Often the drives were hours in length between access points. And so, I can speak for my crew and saying they didn't get a whole lot of rest either, just because there's no direct path for this stuff. The direct path is the trail. And so if you're driving, you're having to go like all the way around to get to the next access point. So it's you really need to do your research and really have a sense as to what you're getting into before you do.